Great. It's time to start. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. With the PCI DSS version 4 enforcement deadline just around the corner, April 1st, and it's not a joke, 2025, we know the compliance is on top of mind for many of you. Today, we are diving into two key updates, Requirement 6.4.3 and 11.6.1, and what they mean for securing your payment pages and meeting these new standards. I am thrilled to introduce our two speakers. First, we have Thomas Borrel, Chief Product Officer at DataStealth, who's been at the forefront of creating cutting-edge compliance solutions for many years. Thomas, do you want to add anything?
No, thank you. Thank you, Kenny. Thanks, everyone, for joining the webinar today. Looking forward to a great conversation, a productive conversation.
Thank you. And Steve Porter, security consultant at SecuredNet and a qualified security assessor, QSA, who helped countless organizations navigating PCI DSS requirements. Together, they will guide us through the challenges and opportunities these updates bring. And I'm Evgeny. I will navigate the discussion today, and I hope to learn a lot as well. So let's get started. Thomas, maybe you can start the conversation to explain what does 6.4.3 and 11.6.1 mean?
Sure, happy to. So when I think about 643 and 1161, those two requirements from PCI 4.0.1, I look at one as being more engineering focused and the other one being more operations focused. So on the engineering side, you have requirement 643. It's about all payment scripts are loaded and that are loaded and executed in a consumer's browser must be inventoried, authorized. There must have a written business or technical justification, and there must be a system, a method that is implemented to assure the integrity of each script. The second one, 1161, is about operations. And so it's about alerting personnel of unauthorized modifications. It's about evaluating the security impacting headers and the scripts and doing so at regular intervals. So what we see with both these requirements is that something that may start as being perceived as relatively innocuous and being an engineering focused requirement in fact has significant operational impact organizational wide, because when I look at a payment page or when I look at a payment site, there's a number of stakeholders that come into play when it comes to building and operating that site, ranging from engineering to product to marketing. And all those are going to have an impact on the scripts that are loaded onto that page. So certainly a much larger topic than just engineering.
Makes sense. So if I'm a CEO of a company and I'm not very familiar with everything, what does it actually mean for the organization or for me?
Yeah, so what it means is when you look at your payment page and how that payment page is built, in that payment page, you're going to have a variety of components. You're going to have some components that were built or selected by your engineering team to deliver a particular user experience to your clients. And those are going to come in the form of scripts that can be dynamically loaded, dynamically executed based on the user journey on the page. What you have there as well is marketing teams, for example, that are going to have tracking pixels or look at heat map of how users interact with the payment flow or the purchase flow, if you will. And so all these different components that get loaded onto the page now need to be inventoried, need to be tracked, authorized, and need to have a business or technical justification for being there. And so what that means now is the compliance team needs to have a much broader discussion that spans beyond engineering to involve marketing teams and product teams and everyone who has a say onto what's going on to that page to obtain those business and or technical justifications for each of the scripts. But then over and above that, you have the operational side of it too, which is how am I going to monitor those scripts that can be dynamically loaded based on what the user does, because historically we've gone from simple pages to complex pages, sometimes what's referred to as a single page application, which is effectively a big JavaScript application running onto the payment page. So more sophisticated user experience that now need to be adequately controlled with proper methods to make sure that no one, and that's really at the core what 643 and 1161 is about, is to make sure that no one can skim credit card numbers by altering any of the scripts that are loaded either directly or indirectly on the page as the user goes through the payment flow.
I want to go to AI, but I'm kind of waiting till the time when the AI will build web pages for us automatically and how it's going to complicate PCI compliance and what we're going to do there. But we're not there yet fully, so let's put it on the side and we'll talk about it a different day. So let's move to talk about what we can actually do about it and how we can satisfy the requirement. Steve, maybe you can help us there.
Yeah, thanks. I There's a couple of different options, really. I mean, we have the standard discussion that every organization has around do we buy or do we build? That has different implications, of course, which I think most companies have had those discussions many, many times over the past few years. Some opportunity or some organizations have the opportunity to build internally because they have a strong development shop and they have a number of developers internally that are able to do that kind of a thing. And that has implications we'll discuss a little bit later, perhaps. The other option is you look for third-party solutions that are, laser focused on addressing these particular needs. As there's a number of different companies out there. I mean, obviously, DataStealth is one of them. There's others that we won't discuss today, but there's plenty out there. They have different approaches to it, but they address both parts that Thomas was speaking about, both the technical element of implementing the inventory and the monitoring and such of the various scripts being brought into the pages, making sure that it's not changing, making sure that it's not being injected with attack code. And it addresses the other requirement, 1161, of the monitoring and the management side of it as well. So those are really the two main approaches to it.
This is an interesting topic. I've been in cyber for a bit longer than 20 years. While not in PCI, I've been in network security, endpoint security, and a solution architect. And lately, what we see on the market is the idea of third-party management, third-party assessment. We have many other companies that are doing something for us. Mm-hmm. And why I mention this, because it's a good idea to maybe outsource to someone that their core business is do this particular part. But my security hat comes up and say, okay, how do I check who is checking the browser and who is checking the checker? How do I know that company like DataStealth or other companies actually have good practices? How would I know, putting my data even more at risk because of XYZ? So Thomas, Steve, maybe we have a discussion. What would you recommend companies to check when they're trying to find such a company to work with?
Yeah, that's a great question, a great point. Supply chain attacks or supply chain management in general has a much greater focus under PCI version 4 than it did in previous versions. And all we're doing really is asking our customers to ensure that their third parties, vendors that they select, are taking care to be as secure and as compliant as they are. Asking, hey, is your third-party provider PCI compliant? If they are, can they provide an AOC and maybe a responsibility matrix showing what they're responsible for, what you're responsible for, or what you share even? Some requirements or shared responsibilities. And this is very commonplace because let's face it, most companies today have some level of involvement in using some cloud architectures, whether that's Azure or AWS or GCP. I think most people in the call here today have seen a responsibility matrix from one of these cloud providers in the past 5 years for sure. And that helps to, one, give the client the assurance that, yes, we can trust this company. They've gone through the same steps that we're going through as being PCI assessed and compliant. It tells us where their liability ends and ours begin. And it gives that liability shift in the event that something does happen. So There's a couple things there, but realistically, it's just making sure that your partners are doing the same things that you're doing.
Was anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Steve. You know, if you look at and you mentioned two approaches, I would look at, you know, we sort of blended the third one into the second one. You have the build, you have the buy, and you have buy a product, and you have buy a managed service, right? Make it someone else's problem, essentially, which is that third option. And I completely agree with Steve that, uh, and even that applies across the board. There's always the question of who checks the checkers. And so if we apply this, I'll start with the easy one, which is I decide that I'm going to engage a managed service provider for this. If that managed service provider is PCI compliant, they have an AOC, they have a RACI, that makes it significantly easier for the merchant and for the assessor of the merchant, whether an ISA or a QSA. So that's sort of the ideal path. If I buy a product, the question remains of how do I know that the product has not been tampered with? So in the case of some solutions that you can find, which are basically scripts monitoring scripts, well, the question then is, the requirements are very clear that every script on that page needs to be tamper protected. So if I use a script to monitor my scripts, how do I know that the script that monitors the script is tamper protected? Do I need a script that monitors the script that monitors the script? And then you can start, you know, I can see the smile. You can start building that tree and have that conversation going in a loop. And the first option that we had, which was, you know, what can I do? Like, could I build the product? And I think that conversation needs to be split between, can I technically build the product? Do I have the technical skills as a merchant or as a company to build that product? Which in many cases, the answer is probably going to be yes. But then the second question there is, do I have all the right controls in place to do it in such a way that whatever I build is going to be PCI compliant? Because now, if I build it, it's going to be subject to a variety of rules around change management, who makes a change to what, all the control for the software being pushed, you know, and so on and so forth. The list is very long. And so in an attempt of solving two requirements myself, I may, as a company, open up myself to a variety of additional requirements now that become that sort of unintended consequences of someone throwing the gauntlet at engineering saying, I bet you can't solve this. Engineering coming back saying, of course we can, and here it is. And they have, but now you've just opened Pandora's box and activated a bunch of requirements on your organization.
I'm wondering, kind of to close this topic, how much data residency, because as a proud Canadian, do we want the data to be in Canada? From my perspective, yes, but from PCI DSS, do they care?
So, I mean, my experience has been data residency that isn't so much a topic as much as it is protecting the PAN, the primary account number, the credit card number, right? That is the mandate of the DSS Council, is really about protecting the, I'll simplify, the credit card number, if you will, or the PAN. Residency, less of an issue, but I'd be curious to get Steve's opinion on this.
Yeah, well, thank you, Thomas. Yeah, I agree with what you said there. It's more about protection of the PAN versus the residency. But one thing I might note to anybody on the call here today is, if you are looking at your residency, if you are looking at where this data is being stored, transmitted, or processed, you may need to be careful when you're selecting your QSA as well. And some QSAs are only certified to perform assessments in certain regions. So if you are using services that might be outside of, say, a lot of QSAs, probably for clients here today, are probably certified for North America or Canada and US, which Surprisingly, there are two different regions under PCI. But maybe you have services that are operating out of Europe. Well, your QSA may need to be certified for Europe to ensure that they're properly covering you and assessing everything that you handle. So just a little bit of a tip there to be cautious of that. Now, as far as PCI though, no, data residency does not really play a role. As long as it's part of your scope, it's part of your environment, it's being assessed, that's all that truly matters. And as long as it's being identified on your SACD or your ROC or whatever SAQ you're doing to say where your data centers are located and what's being contained in them, disclosure really is the key here, right? Just making sure you have a good inventory.
So as part of security, we have this idea of availability, not just security. Mm-hmm. And while the company, and we're talking about the companies that are processing payments, want to continue to be available and make money and serve the customers, the end user, what do I do? How do I actually collaborate with everyone, with the stakeholders in the company without breaking the payment system to make all these changes? Thomas, maybe you can start.
Yeah, so and I think this is where, regardless of the path you go down to, buy, build, or buy and manage service, I think it's fundamental to really help the compliance team understand who the stakeholders are within your organization, because they're going to have to go and seek that business or technical justification for each of the scripts, and obviously collaborate with either the vendor or the internal team to get the security impacting headers protected too. But if we take a couple of steps back, we're essentially talking about putting sort of a list of scripts in front of a compliance team and saying, go get the authorization. Well, how do I know who can give me the business or technical justification? Which team within my organization can give me that? And so starting with an assessment of this is what I have on my page, this is the inventory, getting a feel for who the owners of those scripts that are present on my payment page are. And by owners, I think we need to look at it both internally and externally. So some examples that you're going to find of scripts that you'll see on payment pages, you'll have, your typical Google Analytics, Bing Analytics, and so on, TikTok Analytics, etc. So first of all, understanding who is the vendor that supplies these scripts that are loaded onto the payment page, because that could have an impact on how their security is perceived, because not all vendors are going to be looked at equally. But the second level of ownership is who within my own organization owns that script, so that I can approach them to get that business or technical justification, understand the level of due diligence that was done on the code that we received from those vendors. Because, and that's really the challenge, if you will, for having all these scripts, is when you look at how a payment page is constructed, you can have effectively three different types of scripts. You have your inline, which is built by your engineering team, first-party script built by your engineering team, and third-party scripts that come from third-party vendors. Where things get complicated is all the dependencies on those. Your engineering team may pull a script from some third party. That needs to be verified. The third party may pull a script from another third party. That needs to be verified. And that tree can go very, very deep. And so understanding business ownership within the organization, understanding ownership, like intellectual property ownership with vendors, doing a proper assessment of the security measures that those varying vendors are going to have is key as part of deciding whether scripts are authorized or not. And then from there, also figuring out what the alerting flows and the response to any kind of tamper needs to be, right? Before March 31st, alert is okay. After March 31st, the script can no longer execute on the consumer's browser. So what does that mean, and how do you want to operationalize this?
I was never thinking that asset management will be related to what scripts I'm running on my website. But sounds like I need to have an asset management on what exactly running on my website, who's responsible on this. Very, very smart and very, very interesting. don't know how people are actually going to maintain this. If it's like an Excel, like how do people maintain this? Like, what do they do?
So if you want to maintain that with an Excel spreadsheet, I'm going to start by wishing you good luck. And ask you how strong your Excel skills are, because some of those scripts are dynamically built. They built on a variety of variables, right? So Steve could access the page and get a version of the page with a different language and different scripts associated with it, versus me based on whatever settings that we have on our machine. So, it can become very rapidly a multi-dimensional model, and that's where, having um, looking for tools that have been built specifically for this, and also understand how the loading chain of all these scripts works, that one can pull a child script or a dependency that pulls a dependency that pulls multiple dependencies, and is capable of tamper protecting the entire loading chain in real time every time the page gets refreshed. Because um, as a merchant, any sort of e-skimming, if you process 1,000 transactions a year, e-skimming over a 7-day period is going to result in a couple of dozen credit cards. Is that problematic? Of course, greater than zero is problematic, but in reality, a couple of dozen is not the end of the world. But if you process 1 million transactions an hour, or even 1 million transactions a day, now 7 days starts being a lot of credit card numbers. And so from a liability perspective, it changes the paradigm quite dramatically.
If you want to mention it is a live show, we have several people in the chat. Don't be shy. Please ask questions. We'll get to questions in the end of the topics. So we'll be happy to answer the questions you have. You mentioned something interesting about we can no longer use the browser to execute code. Can you elaborate on this part? Because many attacks in general, not just PCI, happened because of browser code execution and the browser wasn't ready and we able to stall certain information. So I think it's not just relevant for PCI, it's relevant for people in general when they're visiting websites.
Yeah, so the reason why I use like the code cannot execute in the browser is because this is the language, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm not using the exact word, but that's what the standard says. It's about executing in the browser, as opposed to what we believe is a much stronger approach, which is preventing the code from reaching the browser. So in one case, if you say, I don't want the code executing on the browser, what ends up happening is, as the compliance person from a merchant, you have to rely on a device you don't know, running a browser you don't control, operated by an individual you have no linkage with, to be compliant. They all have to play ball for you to be compliant. Because if you deliver the malicious code to the browser and you rely on something that's running in the browser to prevent that code from executing, it's going to be dependent upon a variety of factors, order of execution being one of them. Could I actually prevent it from executing? What is it doing? Is it trying to do something malicious directly, or is it trying to patch another script for that script to do something malicious? It becomes far more complicated. What we believe is a far superior approach is you look at those scripts upstream and you evaluate those scripts based on by comparing them to their authorized version. If their authorized version is different, then simply remove the script from the page if it's a non-critical script, or block the page, so that all the browser has to do is render the content that it receives. It is no longer part of your compliance chain per se. You've effectively blocked the threat before it gets to the browser, which also eliminates some of the compatibility issue that we see with some solutions that will work with the top 5 browsers, your Firefox, Internet Explorer, Edge, Chrome, and Safari. but don't work with Opera, which represents 2.3% of the internet traffic, Samsung Internet Browser, which surprisingly is 2.5% of the internet traffic. So those two combined represent 5% of the internet traffic that is effectively not protected as a release noted limitation, let alone what happens now, in other browsers, depending upon how the device is operating, what the user is doing, some of the settings that the user might have changed.
We've been talking a lot about the changes and my mind kind of racing because if I need to come to someone like Steve and explain to them that I am now meeting the requirements, how do I do? Like, what do I show? Like, how do I show the evidence and what type of evidence are sufficient enough to show QSA that we did what we did? Is there any clarifications? Is there any guidelines there?
That's a great question. So, as a team of QSAs here, I just want to mention we're probably we're more technical, I guess, in nature than a lot of QSAs that most of our clients have worked with in the past, or at least that's what we're told. Maybe they're lying to us. I don't know. Maybe they're buttering us up. But we try to stay on top of the various solutions that are out there, the third-party solutions for sure, especially the ones that we know that are PCI certified. And that way, if you're using one of these products, you can just say, hey, we're using this product, here's their AOC, and we're good, we're happy, we can move on. We'll obviously look at some of the code perhaps to make sure it's implemented correctly, if it's code-based, or if it's a straight-up service or such as DataStealth, we don't really have to look at anything except maybe look at the console that the client would be accessing perhaps. If it's an in-house, though, this gets into a little bit of a different situation. If it's an in-house solution, and this is something I alluded to a little bit earlier in the session here. At that point, we have to ask for your developers to come in and talk to us, and possibly DBAs if you're storing any data. Like basically, everybody that's part of that in-house build is now going to be part of your assessment as well. And this greatly increases time, effort, costs, etc. Because a custom built solution, and I'm not knocking those, don't get me wrong, but it's going to take more time for our team to look at it and review it and assess it because we're not familiar with it. We can't look at it in advance as opposed to a third-party solution such as DataStealth and others where we've seen the solutions, we walked through it, we've done demos, we know how it works, we know the guts of it. So it's more of a checkbox at that point for us. So that's probably the two different scenarios that we tend to see.
I'm gonna go a bit sideways now.
Sure.
With all the things running on the website, we mentioned about different scripts. If I don't know what I have for a variety of reasons, and you probably should, can I use something like DataStealth to deploy on my website to at least map what I have to create this asset management that I can then later on do the evidence?
I'm gonna let
So the short, sorry, yeah, I figured I would jump in on that one, Steve. But by all means, if you want to answer, I'm all ears. So the short answer to your question, Evgeny, is yes. So the way we operate is we essentially sit in the line of traffic between the consumer's browser and the server that hosts a payment page or payment pages, and that unique position and very powerful position gives us the ability to dynamically affect the page that gets delivered to the consumer's browser. So what that means specifically as it relates to your question is, if I have a variety of scripts on my page that are not authorized scripts that my engineering team cannot remove for one reason or another because it's too complicated or they don't have the cycles or whatever the case may be, we can dynamically remove that script every single time the page is queried so it never reaches the consumer's browser. And so what that does now is you have that inventory of scripts that are on the page, that inventory of scripts that should be on the page. And we have the ability to say, okay, whatever is on the page that is not, what is on the list that is not on the should be on the list, just remove it. And we can also supplement some security mechanisms. So, 643 and 1161 talk about the use of SRI tags and so sub-resource integrity tags and CSPs, content security, for HTTP traffic, for web traffic. And so we have the ability, for example, to add a CSP content security policy on the page as well, if there isn't one present, to sort of strengthen the security of the system and add additional layers as needed because of that unique position on the network without ever affecting the server itself. Like, no changes are required on the server and no changes are required on the consumer's browser. It's completely transparent to
just to be fair to the open source community. We have a question here from the audience. Is there any open source tools that you're familiar that can help monitor the compliance part for the PCI?
Okay, so that's a very broad question, right? Because here we're talking about 643 and 1161 that are 2 of 329 requirements. Yeah, give or take a few percent. Okay, I think it's 329, but so that's
let's focus on these 2 points, the one we're talking. Okay.
Yes. So I'm not aware of open source tools that allows that type of monitoring, and more importantly, monitoring is one aspect, but you have that requirement for the script to not execute on the consumer's browser. So the question then becomes, if a temporary event is detected, if there's some sort of an indicator of compromise, what can you do next? That's part of the question that needs to be answered under 643 and 1161. I'm not aware of any, but by all means, Steve, if you are, very interested to hear from you.
And if anybody that's listening to us know a tool, feel free to put in the chat as well. We'll give it to everyone.
Yeah, I'm personally am not aware of any either, and this is something that I did speak to my team about before this webinar, and none of us have come across anything yet that's truly open source. We have seen some things where clients have built some options and built some tools internally that seem to help semi-automate it. I won't say it's fully effective, but there's nothing I'm aware of at this time, but I would gladly share with anyone if we come across anything.
Yeah, and just to add, and it sort of loops back to a conversation we had earlier as well, is there is the software itself, which is part of the solution, but not the entirety of the solution. So if there were, and perhaps there are, open source tools that allow to solve 643 and 1161, great, fantastic. The open source community is absolutely incredible for the work they do. But the problem remains of, okay, now who owns it? Who makes the changes? Who manages patches? Because now it needs to be patched, right? So we go back to whoever that team is that's going to own this, they're now going to be in scope for potentially other requirements within the 329, because you've brought that responsibility within those controls within your own company.
There is one exception to that, Thomas, that we tend to accept anyway, is if somebody wants to use an open source script or tool and they want to bring it in-house and they want to perform a full code review and they want to do all of that and they self-certify that version of it, then that's fine. But at the frequency that open source tools are updated and modified, that's a very onerous task. I mean, that's a lot of work, a lot of effort. So I just want to throw that out there, though.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So, because the deadline is coming very soon, what people and companies should do to be able to actually be ready for the compliance?
Yeah, so you're right that it's coming very, very fast. And when we think about sort of readiness, if you will, the first part of it is going to be about building a plan, right? So who are my stakeholders? Who do I need to engage with? How are we going to deal with that inventory? How are we going to deal with events like indicators of compromise, temporary events? So from that, plan, then I'm going to need to go next into quantifying the people impact. If I do an internal tool versus if I buy a tool versus if I buy a managed service, what does that mean from an internal effort perspective in terms of keeping that inventory up to date? Because it's not a one and done, right? Every time a script changes, I need to update my inventory, provide a new business or technical justification, update all my tamper protection system, and that's ongoing. So build a plan, quantify the people impact, then deploy the tool, and typically what we recommend, or the approach that we take, is to start in alert only mode, to get familiar, like iron out the quirks internally before we start going into full-on prevention mode or protection mode, because that protection mode could have a direct business impact by preventing consumers from completing their purchase. If a script that affects the payment flow has been tampered with, I need to make sure my page is blocked. And so starting with that alert mode only, then move into an enforcement mode. But I would say those are sort of the 4 key steps. Build your plan, quantify the people impact to help you with the decision of buy, build, buy a service, then deploy in monitoring only mode, and then switch over to protection mode. Anything I've missed or you'd want to add there, Steve? Obviously, talk to your QSA should have been one of those steps too, but I'll let you speak to that, Steve.
Yeah, I think that was probably the only thing I was going to add, was talk to your QSA or your ISA if you have an internal. Put together, as Thomas pointed out, put together your plan and have some pretty firm timelines on it. The scheduling around this stuff is very important. And there is a chance that, maybe you're only learning about this today and you're just starting to put together your plan and stuff now, and you're going to slip a little bit past that April 1st deadline. Talk to your QSA about it. See if maybe, hey, we have a plan, we've selected a product or we've selected an approach. Maybe it'll buy you a little bit extra time there. It's not going to buy you another year by any means, or even 6 months perhaps, but it'll give you some leeway with the proper QSA. As long as you have a timeline and you have a plan in place, that they're usually pretty understanding. I may be speaking out of my own experiences here, but most of the QSAs I know, even from other firms, are somewhat flexible with the new requirements such as this.
Great. Thank you. We have a question here that I'll try to read. I think the speakers touch on this a little bit, but is a CSP the best way to meet requirements 6.4.3 and 11.6.1? You also mentioned SRI, sorry. Could you explain why SRI is a good addition to CSP? So I personally don't know what SRI mean. Maybe you can explain to everyone and then answer the question.
Sure. So an SRI tag, it's you effectively, when you build the script, you create a cryptographic signature for that script, and you attach the cryptographic signature for the script with the link to the script. So when the page gets created, you're going to have an indicator of, here's my script, right? So here's the link to the script. And right next to it, you'll attach an indicator that says, and I've signed it using that cryptographic algorithm, say a SHA-256 or something like that. And then this is the signature that I got. The end result you get from this is when the browser receives the script, if it sees that there is an SRI tag right next to the script, it will download the script, cryptographically, calculate the cryptographic signature that it gets, compare it with the one that's in the tag, and if they match, execute the script. If they don't, not execute the script. So that's, in a nutshell, what an SRI tag is. So if you look at, and I'll speak to SRI and then I'll speak to CSPs. If you look at SRI tags, they're not the be-all end-all for requirement 643 and 11.6.1, because if the SRI tag, if someone tampers with a script, the first thing they're going to do is remove the SRI tag. And since there cannot be an indication that says all the scripts on that page are protected by SRI tags, then the browser is going to see the new script. It's not going to see an SRI tag right next to it. It's going to go and execute it. So it basically bypasses the security. The second limitation of SRI tags is on the supply chain side. For SRI tags to provide a technical solution, they need to be implemented by absolutely everybody. And that includes your first-party scripts, so yourself, your third-party scripts, but also all the dependencies from everybody. So, you were talking about the open source community earlier on and how quickly the open source community moves. Some of those scripts are open source scripts. They don't have the SRI tags associated with them. And so unless everyone starts putting SRI tags everywhere, you're always going to have potential attack vectors as a result. So that would be sort of the big one, if you will, the big limitation around SRI tags. On the CSP front, so the content security policy, it more has to do with, can you load content from this domain? So only load content from this domain, that domain, or this other domain. It doesn't go in detail. It's not granular around what you're going to be loading from those domains and whether it's signed or not or anything like that. So it's sort of, if you look at the Venn diagram of what 643 and 1161 require you to address, SRI tags are going to provide some coverage. CSPs are going to provide some coverage as well. But both of them cannot, don't cover the entire 643 and 1161 spectrum. And the last thing I'll leave everyone with is, under 1161, we talk about tamper protecting security impacting HTTP headers, while CSPs are security impacting HTTP headers. And they don't have a built-in tamper protection mechanism. So you get back to the who watches the watchers. So again, that's another area where the Venn diagram is sort of left wide open and requires all the technology, all the tools to deliver full coverage.
Thank you. There is another answer here, I see. Hello, is there a document available showing how each of the new PCI requirements are addressed at a technical level? How would the JS scanning monitoring solution integrate with an existing application? In particular, how will DataStealth solution combine with the Moneris checkout product, which is UseJS coming from Moneris, and transaction ticket and takes over an iframe to present a payment page to the consumer? Very deep, but I hope somebody can go and answer this.
So apologies, Steve, I'll take that one.
Right ahead.
So a very, very, very specific question there. Obviously, I don't think we should go into the details on this call, but whoever the person that asked the question, if you want to follow up after this webinar, feel free to. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to have a specific conversation with you on this. We do have some information there. We're doing that for clients, but I'll leave you with that. Going in the details, I see we have about 15 minutes left. Would take the entire 15 minutes and then some just to walk you through so the particular of it. But short answer, yes, there is. Happy to provide you with more details. Just reach out to me on LinkedIn and we can work out this way.
Thank you. I do want to open a Q&As, and if anybody wants to ask more questions, please do. Let's see if you see anything in the chat. Oh, I agree. There's multiple tools. So there's few tools here. Thomas, I believe we wanted to share a resource as well. I'm not sure if I see it on the chat. So there was a link. Is it guys doing a free assessment if somebody wants to understand how it's working?
Yeah, so there should be there should be a link provided to everyone.
Yes.
And so what DataStealth wanted to extend an offer to everyone that's on this webinar today to get access to a free payment page analysis to help your organization get started. And we're providing the link. There should be the link somewhere in there. Once we receive your payment page URL, we can do that analysis and book some time with us to review the results and chat about what your plan could look like, what your path towards 643 and 1161 compliance could look like. I see
the page here.
Sarah just posted the link. Yeah, thank you for doing that, Sarah.
People on the live event right now, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Feel free to connect to Steve and Thomas later on, and to me as well later on LinkedIn. I promise I cannot answer these PCI questions, but I'm happy to defer to Steve and Thomas to answer them for you. I can answer other questions. Oh, let's wait a minute or two and see if anybody wants to ask a question. There's anything else? Okay, I don't see anything else right now. Great. If not, thank you everyone for joining us today to talk about PCI DSS version 4, requirements 6.4.3 and 11.6.1. Thomas, thank you very much. Steve, thank you very much. I myself learned a lot, and I'm sure that we're going to be quite a lot of information coming on as well, and a bit of pressure coming as well towards the deadline. Steve, Thomas, do you want to share anything else?
Yeah, just wanted to thank everyone for the time and for attending today. You know, obviously, if you have any specific questions, feel free to reach out to us. Definitely click on the link. The link does not expire to get your free payment page assessment. But 643 and 1161, 2 of 329 and change requirements. They are, if the impact
not expire. Okay.
Yeah. If the impact of a requirement were to be measured in the amount of ink that is utilized to discuss it, I would say this one ranks at the very, very top. Whether you're talking about physical ink or digital ink, there is a significant amount of dialogue on this. And I just want to take a moment, to alert everyone to the fact that today, the PCI Council, and there should be a press release out right now. I'm just refreshing quickly to see, or a blog post. Yeah, there is a blog post. So the PCI Council just announced some changes to SAC-A eligibility that are directly tied to 643 and 1161. So definitely something for all the SAC-As to go check out. I know we're going to be passing that in greater detail, because when it comes to compliance, every word matters. But I wanted to make sure that we drew everyone's attention to this, since we're talking about 643 and 1161. And that blog post was posted literally as we were having this webinar. So I'd love to say that it was all planned. It wasn't. It was just a perfect timing, perfect place for this webinar. So
thank you very much.
Posted that link up there as well, everyone. So just take a look. And for my part, I just want to say thank you for inviting me, and I hope that some of my answers added some value here. And if there is anybody with specific, PCI related questions and such, our team is always open to having a quick sit down or a chat on that, and even just over email or quick 30-minute meetings. So feel free to reach out to us, and we will do our best to answer any of your concerns around the upcoming changes.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. Thank you for Canadian CyberSecurity Network to hosting this, and Steve and Thomas to joining and sharing the knowledge. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.